Alright, everybody, hello and welcome as always to the Other FIFA podcast here on French Island. Brandon and I are still on opposite ends of the island itself, different beaches. I thought about changing the background, but I didn't think of it until just now. So that might be something that we work towards next week. As always, with Australian football, it's been a huge week. The newsreel doesn't really stop ticking over each and every day. We've had more Twitter beefs, more dramas, a whole bunch of different things happening in the world of Australian football that we're going to try and recap for you guys today. I'm joined, of course, though, by Branson Gibson. Bran, how has your week been?
My week's been good, mate, Sean. It's been a good one. As you said, mate, lots going on in the world of Australian football. Big stuff happening. Exciting times ahead for the leagues as well, which is something we'll get into later, mate.
Yeah, we absolutely will. I saw a tweet the other day and it was like there's 45 days or something to still go until the season starts for some of the clubs. And it's just like, oh my God, like this, it's just the longest off season in the world, particularly when so much stuff happens early on, like all the kit leaks and everything that we went through last week because FIFA came out early, all the other different things that kind of come through via way of, transfers and stuff like that, players making the jump from European seasons into the A-League itself, players going the opposite direction, international breaks, windows, all that sort of stuff. It just seems to drag on forever this off-season, but we are getting into the final few weeks and we together today are going to try and talk through a little bit more of the season preview type stuff, which I'm very, very excited to do. But before we do that, we've got some headlines of the week that we want to kind of fire through, so we'll jump into that almost immediately. Now, the first one, and this isn't really on the run sheet, is a welcome to our new Patreon, Samuel Ogg, our first Patreon. He's leading the league at the moment. So for only $1 a month, potentially, if we don't get any further ones between December and now, it means that he will win our fantastic French Island football jersey, which you can see in last week's episode, courtesy of RQ. Thanks again to them for putting that together. If you want a chance to win one ahead of Christmas, our Christmas episode, we will announce that in the lead up. I think it's like the 23rd or 24th of December. We will effectively give one away, and you could potentially win that for only $1 a month. So feel free to join us over on Patreon, support our content, and get yourself an opportunity to get a really great kit for a really cheap price. But one of the big headlines, Branson, the first one, we'll jump straight into that. Do you want to bring it to us? What's going on in the world today?
Well, the biggest news that we want to talk about is the Daniel Sturridge signing. News came out last week that he has signed a contract with Perth Glory. He's going to be joining them this season. He's going to be their marquee man, and that was huge news. Sort of came not out of the blue, but there was some links to some links or rumors on Twitter linking Sturridge to Perth. And when I first read them, took them with a grain of salt. It's like, yep, sure thing. They're probably just making a phone call, ringing his agent, seeing if he's available. I saw on Twitter a couple of people saying that he had other offers for far more money. But Perth was just like, an option there. And then out of seemingly nowhere, it seemed to escalate pretty quickly. And then one morning it was announced Sturridge, and he's joined. And it's super exciting, mate. What do you think of it?
I'm genuinely torn. I think it's good for the league. I think exactly what you said. It was rumoured, I think, on like the Wednesday, and then it was the Friday afternoon, or Friday midday, really, that it was being announced. So it either moved really quickly in the back end, or they did a fantastic job of keeping ongoing negotiations under wraps. So credit to Perth with the way that they kind of pulled it off. We launched our first podcast episode and tweeted about it at 12, and then this news broke at 12:30, and then Gladys resigned at like 1:45. So there was just a whole bunch of stuff that kind of went down on Friday that really kind of took away from our heat and our momentum, but I'm willing to put that aside for the overall good of the game. It is great to see, even in this post-COVID environment where we know international recruitment's a little bit tricky, that we are still able to kind of make signings like this. I do have some doubts, but one of the questions that I kind of wanted to ask you, we'll talk about that in a second, is where do you think Sturridge ranks amongst the all-time signing hype? We've had some huge ones in the past. Dwight York was the first back in the initial season of the A-League when he made the jump from the Championship over to Sydney FC. Alessandro Del Piero, obviously the first name that most people think of. But where do you think Sturridge ranks in terms of overall hype and building some sort of attention towards the league itself?
I think he's up there. I don't think he's number one. Marquees that I would have ahead of him would be Shinji Ono, as you said, Keisuke Honda as well for Melbourne Victory. I'd probably even have Robbie Fowler and Emile Heskey above him. But I think it's right up there. I think, we've sort of seen the league move away from marquees. They've sort of been less reliant on those big name sort of former European players, and they've sort of shifted focus for better or worse. But we haven't sort of had a big name like this in, the past couple of seasons. So from that regard, I think it's pretty good. The English media, again, I saw on Twitter someone post, some English accounts like BBC Sport and Goal and stuff like that posting that, Sturridge had gone to the A-League and they've obviously got millions of followers. So him being, former Liverpool player is obviously a huge boost, I guess, a huge popularity thing. I don't even know. What am I saying? Not
No,
that. I don't know, man.
You're on the right track. No, because
I don't know how I can't articulate it. Like it's a big publicity thing. There's obviously he's a huge name, so I think that's very good. In recent years we haven't had that necessarily, so I think that's good. I think he's probably, borderline top 5 for me. What do you think?
I would put him in the 6 to 10 category, to be honest, because I think and some of that's just personal opinion, I thought when some players kind of returned to the league as well, like when Harry Kewell signed, that one was huge for me. ADP obviously is probably the biggest one because of the Italian communities all around Australia. But Liverpool do, as you've mentioned, have a huge fan support within Australia. Like the last, I think, viral video around Liverpool in Australia was when they came to the MCG and there were 86,000 people singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" before kickoff, like more than they've ever had singing that at Anfield, which is crazy.
Yep.
So their success during the 80s and early 90s with Australian players and all that sort of stuff has really, I think, helped boost their support. And I think this will be a big one for them. A lot of Liverpool fans will get along to try and watch him and see him play. I think where it's a super benefit to the league is that we're now getting more mainstream media exposure on Channel 10. He's already been on Channel 10 twice interviewing with The Project, and I think excerpt of another interview that was featured on their news service. So from that perspective, fantastic move from Perth, fantastic move for the league itself, because we're getting not just the regular Fox Sports broadcast updates, we're also getting some sort of mainstream media traction that, a star of football is coming to the league. So off the field, fantastic, and the work everyone's put in has been absolutely brilliant. I have some doubts and some reservations about how the on-field performance part's going to go, because he does have relatively rough injury history. He
hasn't played in a while as well. Is that right?
And the part that we're not really kind of talking about, and we don't want to shed too big a light on it, is that he actually served a ban for betting on football. So he had his contract in Turkey torn up after making I think 20 odd appearances, but still scoring a few goals. I think he had 11 goals or something like that. And then he was getting investigated. They mulched his contract effectively, and he was banned from all football activity for a 4-month period. So he hasn't played in about a year and a half. So either that's going to be fantastic for him because it's allowed his body time to heal, but he is coming to Australia, particularly to Perth, which has a fairly rock hard pitch for training and playing purposes, which if you've got a history of muscle injuries isn't always the best. We've seen some Danish players, Michael Jakobsen's a good example, kind of complain about how difficult it is on your body to make the jump from European pitches to sort of our rock-based Australian pitches, which are pretty rock hard in some areas. So that part will be fascinating for me. If he stays fit, I think he'll go down as being one of the best signings in the division, still only 32. But if he struggles to kind of get fitness going, at least in the early part of his career, I think it can be really challenging for him. But hope to be proven wrong. So I hope those doubts are just, the little things that gnaw away in the back of my head and not any reality that actually comes through.
Absolutely. I do have one other point that I want to make quickly before we move on to our next headline, and I'll try to articulate this one a little bit better than my previous one for you, mate. I just think it's a big coup for the league as well, because it just sort of signals if he had other options, other offers from different leagues for more money, and he picked the A-League, he picked Perth, or he picked Australia, I think that is a very positive sign for the league as well. We don't, of course, know exactly why he made those decisions, but we've also seen a lot of players who have gone overseas, maybe to the Indian Super League, maybe to other countries in Asia, also then return to Australia as well. So I think that is a positive sign that despite having less money to offer, he still picked Perth and he still picked the A-League men.
And he does, and this is pure speculation. This isn't anything rooted in reality or inside sources or anything. Perth has a really strong like COVID record, little to no case history, little to no restrictions that they've had to deal with other than locking out the rest of the world from Perth. So unless he has to do like a 4 week kind of quarantine period, he has got a young family as well, a few kids and things like that. He potentially that quality of life decision that we're kind of fortunate enough to have in certain areas of Australia, maybe driving that as well. We'll see how it plays out because we're still got to find a way to get Perth in and out of Western Australia and interstate teams in and out of Western Australia to play Perth. But yeah, potentially, like as we kind of move into this new environment, quality of life has become a bigger driver and bigger decision maker than, you know, perhaps would have been in previous years where he might have ended up in the Indian Super League or the Chinese Super League or whatever it is. There is no Indian Super League, I've just realised, so please don't savage us in the comment section below. With every arrival, though, it does sometimes mean that people have to make way to get, you know, cap space or space in squads or whatever else. And unfortunately, it does mean there's a departure as well. Branson, do you want to run us through this one?
Yeah, I think it's been all but confirmed. I don't think Perth Glory themselves have actually announced it, but it looks like Diego Castro is going to be the one who sort of makes way for Sturridge. It seems, you know, one in, one out almost, but it looks like he's no longer going to be with Perth. We saw it was a little bit of a weird relationship last year as well. Apparently he was on, a countrywide caravan tour. He maybe wasn't going to play for Perth or he wasn't going to come back after the season pause, but he ended up doing it anyway. But it does seem that he has left the club. And Sean, what have you made of his time in Australia? Because he's been massive for Perth. He spent the last 6 seasons there. He's top 10 in goals, top 10 in appearances for the Glory. How big of a loss is he going to be?
Huge. I think he's a character, obviously. I don't think he's a unit that's kind of built the same way as a lot of other professional footballers are. His contract with Perth was really unique. He only actually worked for them 6 months of the year, and the other 6 months he was effectively just on holiday doing whatever he felt like doing. So that meant he didn't have to arrive and do a full preseason. He would arrive like in the last couple of weeks of the preseason. And it also meant that he didn't have to go and carry on. Now, they tried to sign him to an additional 1 or 2 months as part of the COVID lockdown back at the end of 2019, when the season technically should have been finished and he was technically kind of out of contract, I guess, is the way to look at it. And that's what he went on.
Bit of a Lionel Messi situation.
Bit of a messy situation. And he then went on a caravan holiday up the coast that he didn't want to cancel, which is why he didn't come back and play for Perth during the kind of pandemic lockdown that we had in New South Wales, that hub model, and then didn't play in the final series for Perth either, which I think rubbed a few Perth fans a little bit the wrong way, like because he technically did his 6 months as per his contract, but during a big chunk of that contract, they didn't actually play. So, yeah, it's a little bit to and fro. So, I think an excellent player. I think he's, again, maybe like in that sort of top 5 players in the history of the league discussion. I think, personally, I'm bitter because he robbed Aaron Moy of a Johnny Warren medal in 2015-2016 when Aaron Moy had arguably the greatest season in league history. No one's gotten anywhere near that assist total of 20 that year. But then at the same time, like I think a player as good as Castro, you'd expect to have more than just a Premier's plate to his name. And that was the only thing that Perth won during his time here. And I think that's what kind of would count him behind the likes of Thomas Perowich, Bessart Berisha, Archie Thompson, Alex Wilkinson, all those players that have really strong records of domestic success and really a larger trophy cabinet in terms of their time in Australia. But individual quality, like individual ability as a footballer, yeah, definitely like a top tier player. He'd 100% be in that conversation of being amongst, I think, the top 2 or 3 players to ever grace the league. So sad to see him go, but, you know, at one point or another, everyone's time comes to an end and he is 38 now. So I'll be fascinated to see where he bobs up next. I don't think he'll retire entirely, but where he plays his next football could be a very interesting one.
Yep, absolutely. Mate, moving on to our next headline, some more big news coming out of the A-League men this week. They have a new official brand, what do you call it? A brand sponsor, branding name partner?
Yeah, they're the naming rights sponsor for the league itself.
Naming rights sponsor, that's it.
Just like the episode of this show, the Isuzu Ute football show, it's the Isuzu Ute A-League. I think some people are saying it's Isuzu. I'm going to go with Isuzu. Correct me in the comment section below. I don't really mind. It means 50 bells in Japanese, so we're the 50 bells Ute A-League, if people were potentially wondering where that's come from. it's interesting. It's fantastic to have a league sponsor. We haven't actually had one since Hyundai, and they departed their relationship in 2018 as the naming rights sponsor for the league. Even though, if you look on Google and sometimes the A League's own press releases, they still put the Hyundai portion on the logo. But they did a fantastic job really getting the game and the league up and running. They were there from the initial season right through to the end of their relationship in 2018. Great to have another sponsor come on board. It is just for the A-League men, we should be clear. A-League women are heavily rumoured to potentially be Commonwealth Bank or another big banking partner, which would be, I think, fascinating contribution to the A-League women as well. But what are some of your thoughts immediately? Because we can't help ourselves, Soccer Twitter immediately came out with a variety of different memes related to this announcement. But what are some of your thoughts as we head into it?
I think it's largely positive. I think it says a lot about the direction that the league is heading in. So my initial reaction was, so it's the Isuzu Ute A-League men. That's a bit of a mouthful. Like, it doesn't quite exactly roll off the tongue, especially because it's Isuzu Ute. I think I saw on Twitter as well that there's like Isuzu Trucks, which is technically a separate company, apparently, in Australia. They're under the Isuzu brand, but apparently totally separate. So Isuzu Ute A-League Men is what the competition is going to be called, which is long. Not the easiest thing to say, but I mean, we can get past that. I think it's largely positive. I think it's good. I think when Hyundai pulled out, that was a little bit, unfortunate. It sort of seemed like the league was heading, not declining, but sort of scaling down a little bit. Like the broadcasting rights were taking a hit. The naming sponsor pulls out. So we've seen a massive new broadcast deal. And now to have a new naming rights sponsor come on board, I think that's really, really good. I think it sort of shows that, people are excited about the product of Australian football. And for a company to go, yep, look, that's a brand that we want to get on board, that we want to support. More money for the game. I think that's got to be a good thing. It just, to me, signifies that the league is growing. So I think it's largely positive, and so I'm happy about it. What about you?
Yeah, look, credit to the APL. The APL had, when they moved into, so when we say APL, for anyone that might be listening internationally, forever, Football Australia ran both the league and all football properties, and then the Australian Professional Leagues was developed to allow the league itself more autonomy and the ability to kind of like govern itself and run itself a little bit differently. Similar to the Premier League breaking away from the FA in England, they operate autonomously as their own organisation now. They had a huge list of stuff, and it looked and felt like for a while that kind of this 18-month spell where we didn't have naming rights partners or sponsors or a broadcaster, all that sort of stuff, that it was pretty doom and gloom. And the APL had a long checklist of things that they really needed to get closed off. And this was definitely one of them. So the first one was a broadcast deal, which I think they've been fantastic with so far. There's still some stuff to come on Paramount Plus as to how football's presented and how it's accessible on that platform, but that will grow and come with time, I'm sure. The mainstream media stuff that they've been doing to really try and get hype up there, the marketing budget for the league, actually seeing advertisements on other websites. You can actually see on YouTube now some videos relating to the A-League as well, and its kickoff and availability on Paramount Plus. Just, it's been so long since we've seen a mainstream media news response or article about the A-League that is in a positive light, that isn't about soccer hooligans or that isn't about some random violence or something in Serbian Division 5 or whatever else. So positive stories about the A-League have been huge, and then this one as well, getting that revenue piece in for the Isuzu A-League men's. While it is a mouthful, it is at least secured income, and I think it's like $3 to $4 million a year, whereas previously Hyundai paid about $6 million. But they're looking at other revenue streams by splitting the men's and women's game to kind of really try and recover some of that money. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we've got an A-League women's sponsor to announce next week, which is hopefully not too far down the track. And then the financial future and the outlook for the leagues themselves are pretty bright. So yes, it is absolutely a mouthful, and it's way too many syllables for a league name. It's going to look horrific in the menus of FIFA and Football Manager, but otherwise, it's good news for the league. We need more cash and we need more sponsors.
Absolutely. Sean, that is all of our news headlines for this week. There is one headline that I want to touch on as well, something that we mentioned last week. It was, of course, Western United and South Melbourne. Western United announcing that they were going to play games at Lakeside that very same day. Hours later, South Melbourne saying, no, you're not. There have been some developments that since then. Western United put out a statement on that Friday, a sneaky little put it out at 4:59 on a Friday, then log off. They didn't publish it on Twitter or social media or anything, saying that they will no longer be playing their games at Lakeside. So a bit of a development from last week's episode. It just sort of finishes off that saga, which is just a PR nightmare for Western United, really, mate.
Their PR department's potentially the worst we've ever seen in the league, which is ridiculous to think, given the history of failed clubs that we've got. Because, here's the part as well, and this is my tinfoil.
Get in touch with Clive Palmer.
They should get in touch with Clive.
They should be worse.
Freedom of speech will adorn the front of all of their shirts next season.
Craig Kelly, look how much money is Clive Palmer pumped into Craig Kelly. Pump that into Western United. Poof.
He needs to stop texting me. That's what Craig Kelly needs to do, but that's a whole other scenario and situation. The portion which is interesting about that is I think Western United potentially employed some level of gamesmanship. We spoke about last week that their CEO immediately went on the forefront and said, we're going to play games out of Essendon's training facility, Windy Hill or the Hangar or whatever it's called. I can't remember. Yeah. And it just felt like they were flying by the seat of their pants. Now it kind of looks like they wanted Amy Park from the start, and now they've effectively forced the league to step in and get them Amy Park. So in a way, it's almost worked in their benefit. But yeah, go for it.
Well, it has, if that's the end result that they really wanted. But they've just tarnished their reputation, whatever shred of reputation they still had in getting there. So it's a weird one. But yeah, so they won't be playing at Lakeside. I think I saw on Twitter saying that South Melbourne aren't even in the A-League yet, and they've already defeated an A-League side or something along those lines. I might have butchered that joke. But anyway.
It's fine. SMFC Mike will be thrilled wherever he happens to be sitting at the moment. But we're going to focus more now on A-League action and hopefully the upcoming season as well, with the first in a series of season previews that we're going to do for each and every club. First one, though, Bram, we're going to start at the very tippity top, the Premiers last season, Melbourne City. There's a variety of different stuff that we want to kind of fire through, and I've put it into some headlines, which I'd like to chat with you on about a little bit further. So Melbourne City, of course, last season, Premiers and champions for the first time in their history, making a jump after finishing second and third and fourth and fifth. Really building since the City football takeover over the last kind of how many years is it? 5 years, 6 years? Whereas many people thought they might turn the league on fire immediately and start building titles and a bigger trophy cabinet and all that sort of stuff, but it has taken longer than initially intended. Some of that is down to the way that they're developing the A-League within the CFG, really trying to nurture and grow the next generation of Australian talent to then move them on either within the CFG organisation, similar to Aaron Moy, Daniel Arzani, Luke Bratton, Anthony Caceres, not Adrian Caceres, that's a throwback. But it has been developed over time, and they've really, I think, over the last kind of 4 or 5 seasons had a long-term view with Eric Monbear and developing Patrick Cosnorbo and developing a playing style that is relatively aggressive and pretty unique to the league itself. So season highlight, obviously, for them, finally getting that silverware, getting that duck off their back. The big criticism was that they didn't have the trophies to back up their pretty large global reach. But for you personally, obviously, City, we're French Island fans first, City fans second. But what were some of your highlights of last year for City?
Well, obviously, the fact, as you said, that they were able to win silverware. Since City Football Group took over, they'd been able to improve every single year. And so the season previous to last season, we saw them finish second, which was their highest ever finish. They had a points record and they made the grand final and lost. So for them to do that again, to improve on that again, there was a lot on the line. They had to actually win stuff, and they were actually able to do it, which was fantastic to see from a Melbourne City point of view, obviously. But to go ahead and improve and finish first, to win the grand final, to beat Sydney as well, the team that they lost to in the grand final the season before as well, that was it was massive for them. They had to get some silverware. As you said, I think they were very smart in the way that they built up. It wasn't just like an immediate injection of success. They sort of built up some strong foundation blocks, and we're going to see, I think, a period of sustained City success. So I think it's taken some time, but I think they've done a pretty darn good job, mate.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you look back on what they did first when they took over, it was building that infrastructure piece, like that elite level training facility. And I think it's good for the Australian game, both men's and women's, that we have that level and access to kind of an elite footballing environment that is, cultivated globally but developed kind of here in Melbourne. They've done that twice now. They built one in Bundoora. They're building another one down in the southeast. One of the big criticisms that Melbourne Heart had is that it had no real geographic area it was trying to represent. Now they've kind of got that clear distinction that they are the southeastern club comparative to Western United, if they're around much longer over in the west, and Melbourne Victory, who tend to take just that central and northern area as their own. So I think that part's been good. The element that I think they'll find their greatest frustration from last season, and I'd love to get your thoughts on, is that nothing breeds growth and bigger crowd numbers and bigger memberships like success on the pitch and playing a great brand of football. And they have arguably over the last kind of 2 years played their best football in front of empty stadiums or in lockdown environments or in, quarantine hubs or whatever else. So one of their big frustrations, I think, is that they weren't effectively able to leverage the entire success of last season, where they really flew out of the blocks as far as the league is concerned, and then towards the end of the year were hampered a little bit by international call-ups. They did it without McLaren, without Good, without a few of their Olyroos as well at various points also. But I think if this season we can get consistent crowd figures back, they'll be able to alleviate some of that by hopefully playing the same brand of football. But from your perspective, City fan perspective, hat on here, what do you think would be their greatest frustration from last year that they're looking to improve upon?
I think that's absolutely it. I totally agree. The one thing I will say is I am willing to give them like a slight pass mark for that because of the lockdown situation. We went to a bunch of City games last year. It wasn't always easy. Even if you remember, you still had to book and redeem, your seat for every single game. We went to one Western United game where, the e-tickets didn't work. So then they just started letting people in for free. There was crowd capacities for some games as well. So it wasn't easy to just rock up. So I will give them a slight off the hook for that. But I think now is when you really want to see that fan base grow. If they can't grow it on the back of, as you said, playing the best football that they've ever played, that's very concerning as well. Some of the star power they've got in there as well. Jamie McLaren, Matthew Leckie, some big names, plenty of young talent too. You'd be thinking that would draw a lot of people in. And if it can't, then that's concerning. So I think that's going to be their biggest goal this season is boosting their crowd numbers and making more of an impact in the grandstands rather than on the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did kind of allude to there some of the players that have come in. Again, bigger name signings than perhaps we've seen from City since the initial takeover, but definitely keeping that kind of Australian and specifically now, I think, a bit of a Melbourne flair to it, trying to bring back some of the players that maybe potentially in previous years would have gone elsewhere in the league. But players out. They've lost Rami Nazarene, who's made the jump over to Western Sydney. He did spend the majority last season on loan at Newcastle Jets and was, on certain occasions, a shining light in that team, but unfortunately hampered by injury, which cost him an Olympic spot. Moody Najjar has made a permanent switch over to MacArthur FC after a year on loan with them last season. Naoki Tsubaki returns to Japan after his loan spell last year. Craig Noon, arguably, I think, his best season for City last season, but he makes the jump across to MacArthur. He's 34 years of age now. Very popular Uruguayan midfielder Adrian Luna heads to Kerala Blasters in India. And Ben Caruccio makes the short drive from Melbourne to Western as he joins Western United on a couple of season deal. Of those outs, who do you think is going to be the biggest one for them to replace this season, and how do you think they go about it?
Well, I think the biggest, it's a bit of a cop-out. I'm going to say two. I'm going to say Craig Noon and Adrian Luna. And part of that is I feel like, your international players are so difficult to get right. We've seen with Melbourne City, Craig Noon and Adrian Luna were both very productive. They were both able to contribute. They both stayed relatively healthy. They were good on the park. We've seen with the Victory that they had a number of their international players who came across and were flops. It was Christian Dobris, Rudy Gested, Shotton. What's his? Can't remember his first name. It's on the tip of my tongue. Ryan Shotton. Yes. Some of those big name. Some of those big international signings who come across having, played in, the Championship or the Premier League or Serie A or La Liga or whatever, and not be able to perform. So I think it's going to be a bit of a question mark for Melbourne City. The international players that they get to replace them, how good are they going to be? Because they were able to hit on their last two. Are they going to be able to do it again?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that transitions nicely into the players in because I think some of those players that you've just mentioned maybe have been replaced, but there are still a few gaps in the squad. So far, just three signings. The first one, Jordan Hall. He makes the unique jump, particularly for Melbourne City, of coming from an NPL club. He's 23-year-old central defender that played with Green Gully, has pretty big raps around the NPL Victoria competition. You are my NPL guy, Brian, so we'll get your thoughts on him in a moment. But then the other two you've already mentioned, Manuel Pucciarelli, hopefully I've got that right, from Chievo Verona, having spent some time out on loan in the Serie B and in the United Arab Emirates last season. And Matthew Leckie, the Melbourne boy, returns home. He played for Adelaide in A-League early on in his career as a 17 and 18-year-old, but never really made an appearance locally. He's from Bulleen area in the northeastern suburbs of Melbourne. But he not just joins, but is on a 3-year deal as well. So at 31, we're likely going to see Matt Leckie playing up until the age of 34, 35 in the A-League itself, unless he makes a jump. The other big thing to note, he's got a young family as well. I think he recently married a German girl. He's come back to Australia. He doesn't really want to go through too much travel. He doesn't want to go through lockdowns and quarantines and all that sort of stuff that have been impacting footballers to different levels throughout his career. So great to see him back in the league. Great to see him back in Melbourne as a Victorian boy. What are some of your thoughts on the players in, and how do you think they're going to contribute to City's season?
John Hall, I think, is a good signing. We saw last year Melbourne City got a bit short in the centre-back department, in particular once Curtis Good was off on international duty. I think as well, Hall as well, you said he's unique for jumping from the NPL to City. I think prior to that, he was actually in the Melbourne City youth setup as well, if I recall correctly. So he's gone Melbourne City youth, NPL, Melbourne City senior team. So an interesting journey there. Pucciarelli, again, it's like what we were saying before. He's a bit of an unknown. You look at some of the clubs that he's played for. He's obviously a capable footballer, but it's like, will he be able to perform in the A-League? It feels like the A-League man is just like such a total different beast. Playing in summer, harder pitches, more travel than a lot of these guys are used to. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to perform in Australian football. And I think, as you said, Matthew Leckie is a massive signing. That is huge. I think he's going to have a great impact. The front three for Melbourne City, you got Naboot, you got McLaren, you got Leckie. That's pretty darn intimidating. So the grand final winners and the champions and premiers, look like they've got even stronger based on those ins.
Yeah, 100%. At the end of last season, I would have thought once with the Craig Noon story kind of broke before it was actually announced by MacArthur. And MacArthur actually announced his signing before Melbourne City announced his departure, which was, again, just MacArthur doing MacArthur things. I would have thought 100% Mark Attilio was going to move into a starting role, given how effective he was in the final series last year, and how incredible his performance, I thought, was in the grand final itself. So there's still that core there, but then they've gone and brought, like, arguably one of the best two Socceroos, the current Socceroo captain as well, as far as I'm aware, in Matt Leckie. So that front three, McLaren, Leckie and Naboot, all born and raised in Melbourne, representing a Melbourne club. Like, these are the sort of things that we're starting to see become more and more prevalent in the league. I think Adelaide United deserve a ton of credit for really setting the standard around developing local talent, and now Melbourne City seems to be following the same routing as well. So it can only be good for the league, can only draw more ties and connections between those players and their clubs, and hopefully their fans as well. We saw all the Steph Kolakowski stuff last year, all fantastic to see. Coach, of course, Paddy Kisnorbo became the first coach last season to win the Youth League, W League and A-League titles with his victory. Scott Jameson will be the captain again this season in his third year. He also became late last season the all-time leading appearance maker for Melbourne Heart or Melbourne City with 105 games to date. Areas for improvement. Obviously, it's a bit tough. We're starting at the top with a team that was premiers and champions and is probably looking favourites to do both again. Where do you think the big areas of improvement are going to be for Melbourne City, both on and off the pitch?
I think in the terraces, to be honest. I think that they are the best run A-League club. Obviously, I might have some bias there, but they seem to hit on a lot of areas in terms of, their off-field side of things, building training facilities, the way that they embrace their W League team from the get-go, how they, invested so much money into them when they first started, to put a super competitive squad on the park. So I really like what they've done there. It seems like, they've got their on-pitch stuff sorted, they've got their off-pitch stuff sorted, but they just need to get, more members and more fans. So I think that's going to be the biggest area of improvement there. And you mentioned with, Kolakowski and Tilio as well. I think it would be good to see some of those younger players have more of an impact from the get-go. I think, yeah, I don't know if you can really call that an area of improvement, but maybe, we've seen some of these young players come into the starting 11 and excel, like not just, be good, but be really, really good. So I think maybe if they can get them more consistent game time from the start, again, I'm not sure if that counts as an improvement, but that's something that I would like to see.
Yeah, it's tough to poke holes in it, to be completely honest, because I was looking the other day as well, while we were putting this run sheet together. Most of their squad is contracted beyond this season. So they've got like a core group of players that they're keeping now up until like 2023, 2024, which is for the A League very unique. I don't think that's something that we've seen a lot, and sometimes that is just the maturity of the league. But a lot of players on 1 year deals. One of the big criticisms you constantly see is that it's a recycling league where players just seem to bounce around clubs year to year without really giving opportunities to NPL players or dropping back down to that level or whatever else. So the big area for improvement that I would kind of want to see from them is having that like long term kind of transition plan, because I think players like Connor Metcalf, Mark Attilio, Nathaniel Atkinson, they had such good Olympic campaigns that in reality, any other year, I think they would be jumping to North American clubs, or sorry, Middle Eastern clubs, Chinese clubs, potentially European clubs as well. They really need to, I think, develop that pathway and platform a little bit more to give those players an opportunity to shine in the team and really show what they can do. Denny Genro is a good example, was at Toulouse, tried to come through at Melbourne City during a rough period where Warren Joyce was the primary manager who wasn't doing the best job about bringing through some of that young talent, and then obviously moved on to MacArthur, got good game time at MacArthur, had a good Olympic campaign. It is now starting on a regular basis for Toulouse in League Two as they look to try and get promoted. So I think they want to try and continue down that pathway of balancing success and that ongoing success that I do think they need to grow the fan base with, still maintaining that development and that growth for a lot of young players, because it as a place to play is, I think, where a lot of young players who aren't getting game time and opportunity at other A-League clubs will be looking to try and get to try and step into those roles. Like Aidan O'Neill's a great example, Connor Metcalf's a Newcastle boy, a few other players in and around the league and in and around the squad as well will be looking to come to the City Academy to get involved with that. So tough thing to balance, but that's I think where they're going to look to try and maintain focus this year. Membership pitch though, Bram, we're going to do this for every single club. We're going to focus on the positive. We're going to focus on the sell. We want to see more people in the terraces, as you've mentioned, but we want that for the entire league itself because it's the best league in the world. What would your membership pitch be for City fans that are maybe umming and ahhing about signing up as a member this season?
The pitch would simply be there's no better time to be a City fan. I mean, that should sell itself. I mean, they're winning silverware. They've lost two key pieces in Luna and Noon, and you could argue that their squad is even better. There's a lot of positive signs, a lot of positive things going on at the club as well. So I think my pitch would just be there's no better time to be a City fan.
Yeah, and you get to hang out with us every weekend when we have home games, if we're allowed to go there. So yeah, if you want photos, if you want autographs, that's probably the best way to do it as well. So their expectations, I think we've kind of already highlighted. They'll expect to go close to both the Premiership and Championship this season. And I think
it's got to be top two. Got to be top two.
Yep, definitely. I think they'll also want to try and get some sort of performance in the Asian Champions League in one way or another. Obviously, COVID kind of took that opportunity away for the A-League clubs. What is your prediction for how you think the season's going to go? And where would you position City as far as the power rankings are concerned? This will be an ongoing part that we do at the end of each season preview. We try and place where we think they'll be on the ladder or where they'll be challenging, and then we will update that power ranking throughout the course of the season. So where would you put City?
I'd put them right at the very top, to be honest. They're the reigning premiers, the reigning champions, and you look at their squad and they seem to be even stronger than they were. So I think that their expectations have to be top two. I think they're the favourites to finish on top. Whether they can win the grand final again, hard to say. That's always a tricky one to predict, but I think they have to be shooting for top two, and I think they have to be favourites. Looking at some of the other teams in the league, at least on paper, I don't quite know who would catch them. So I think that's got to be their goal.
Yeah, anything can happen. Injuries can, key positions can happen, all that sort of stuff. They got through it last season. The Socceroo call-up would have destroyed a lot of other sides in the history of the league, but now it's about how do they replicate, the dominance of another team that we'll talk about in a moment over the last 5 or 6 years, the dominance of that Brisbane Roar team, the ongoing continued success that Melbourne Victory has had within Melbourne itself. So the battle for hearts and minds is still well alive within Melbourne and Victorian football. Their round one fixture, is the season opener against Brisbane Roar at Amy Park on Friday the 19th of November at 7:45 p.m. Get yourself vaccinated, get yourself down there if you can. We want the league to start with a bang. Hopefully we get relatively good crowd figures that are actually able to go to the venue. Fingers and toes crossed. Brand and I will hopefully be there if we're allowed to be, and the season will hopefully kick off with a bang because they're two very aggressive sides, two sides that are going to come out and play, and it should be a fascinating contest as well. But that does bring us to the end of our Melbourne City season preview, Branson. We are going to jump across now into our Hall of Fame. So last week, Bran, we unanimously, the two of us, voted Marvin into the Hall of Fame. He becomes the backdrop for our collage that we've got here on the screen. We will add more faces, more names, more inductees over the next few days, weeks, months, whatever this happens to be. But another week, a whole lot of other headlines that we've seen come through. How do you want to do this? Do you want to go first, or would you like me to walk you through my nomination this week?
I'll go first. I'll just take the reins, man. I'm just going to go for it. Marvin needs some company in there. We know he's a big Mariners fan, and I think the perfect people or things, I don't know, to give him company would be a couple of his Central Coast friends, the sauce bottle mascots for the Central Coast Mariners. We've seen barbecue sauce, we've seen tomato sauce. I don't know if there's been mustard. Barbecue sauce is pretty infamous. He was a little bit spicy. One time he was caught giving the Newcastle away fans the finger, which is just one of those absolute all-time classic peak A-League moments. But I think the sauce bottle mascots deserve a spot in our Hall of Fame. Of course, the Mariners, I don't believe, are sponsored by Master Foods this season. They have been their front of shirt sponsors in the past. They are now sponsored by Mate. So I don't know if the sauce bottles are going to be appearing in Gosford anymore. But if that's the case, they definitely belong in our Hall of Fame because they are absolutely fantastic. And what other league has sauce bottle mascots, mate?
I think we're safe and that they are going to be in the league. I think they're not the front of shirt sponsor, but they are still like a stadium sponsor or a league sponsor or
Fantastic.
a partner or whatever else.
That's good. That's good. I'm happy about that.
I would not be shocked even if they had departed, if there weren't like some nondescript like home brand versions of the sauce bottles that we would see appearing because it has become synonymous. So a worthy nomination. I've gone with a different tact and I'm actually going to show you this one because I don't know if you've seen it. So if you can have a look on the Discord, right? I'm prepared this week, right? I'm coming because I want the crown. I want to have the most nominations going into the league. This is Matt Haynes Sport Twitter account. Last week we spoke about kits in great detail, and then a couple of days ago, Matt Haynes, who's a bit of a designer in his own right, has put together a whole bunch of different kind of concept kits that he's put together, which he did it for all of the 12 of the A-League clubs, which I found fascinating. So what I want to ask you, Brent, I'm nominating Matt Haynes for because I think some of these are absolutely fantastic and massive improvements on what the league has kind of put together or what the clubs have put together for their kit this season. So I'm going to show these all to you, Bran, and you just tell me if you think it's better or worse than the A-League kit that they've released this year. So the first one up here is Sydney FC. What do you think? Better or worse? I agree. We've not started strong. But the next one, Wellington Phoenix.
Can I just say, just very quickly, worse, does not mean bad. It's just, but, anyway, yeah. I prefer, that's pretty darn good. I'll be honest. I like that.
Yeah, it's very, very good.
One thing I will say is Phoenix's stripes, it gives me more Tiger Bumblebee vibes than Phoenix, but it does look very, very good.
So apparently, allegedly, that it's supposed to represent the Phoenix wings on the logo, but it's like jagged and segmented. So it's put on there like tape. I don't see that portion of it, but if it was something, you can do worse. You know what the marketing wank is kind of like for a lot of these kit releases and all that sort of stuff.
Looks very good.
I think it's better than the one that they released. I'll put that out there. Next one, Western Sydney Wanderers, better or worse?
Worse for me.
Worse because of the arms. I'll go with that. If there was a bit more, it's just the extra red portion on there. But I do love that the A-League's logo, the kit manufacturing logo, which is Matt Haynes Sport, and Voltaren have all been colour corrected. That is a huge, huge part of the league itself. We jump to the next one, Western United. They've brought in the black sash. I don't mind this one, Bram. What do you think?
I'm a sucker for a sash. I love it. I don't know if I'd have it on par with Western United. I mean, their home kit this year, it's just black and green stripes. It's not very exciting, but that's their look. So that's fine. You know, it's sort of like if you're a Newcastle United fan in the Premier League, you know every season they're just going to wear black and white stripes. So I think Western United, it's a hard one to beat. I like that one. I can't say it's better than their current one though, because they've stuck with that look. So it's on par for me. I think that looks good.
I like it. I think it's better than their current kit because I think more green is better, and I think they've had the exact same kit now for 3 seasons. So I'm a fan of that one. Melbourne City. Now, what are some of your thoughts on this one? It's basically like an interpretation of their existing kit, but with an extra kind of cross put on there to represent the Victoria Cross on the badge. I don't love it, but it is growing on me. What do you think?
I I prefer this more than the Wellington cross. Let me say that. If the sleeves were blue, I might like it a little bit more. But I don't mind it because, you know, like the cross on the Knicks jersey, you look at that and you go, what does that represent? The cross on this, I imagine, represents the cross in the flag of Melbourne. So I don't mind that in terms of incorporating more Melbourne into the kit design. I know that was some of the criticisms we had last week. So I'm going to say I prefer the current one, but I don't mind the direction that this one's going. I don't mind it.
About the same for me, the old one, like the current one and this redesign, but it can be a challenge at times. Melbourne Victories, largely derided kit last season because of the belly placement of the logo. This time they've gone with kind of like a V pattern down the middle. What are some of your thoughts on this compared to what
I like
they've
it.
offered
That's
this
good.
year?
I
Yeah,
like it. That's good. One thing I will say, the City Sash got criticised, or not criticised. Some people said it looked like a tyre pattern. That looks even more like a tyre pattern, but that's actually really good. I quite like that because that's quite a good interpretation of this chevron V and not one that I've seen before in some of those concept kits. So I like it. It's a good way to incorporate it. You don't get into that trap of a massive white V and the sponsor logo, as you said. I don't mind it.
and again, like just make your sponsor logo go with the color palette that you're going with on your kits. It makes them look so much better. Next one, Port of Newcastle has been color amended, which is a huge improvement on its own. But the Newcastle kit, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd prefer that. It's more or less the same, but the fact that they've color coded the Port of Newcastle logo, I think, is very good. It just incorporates in far nicer as opposed to just seeming like it's been copied and pasted and whacked right on the front there.
I think I gave the Newcastle logo a 6 last week. This is closer to like an 8 or a 9. I think that's phenomenal.
Yep. Yep.
Perth Glory, BHP, with a little bit of extra orange on the sides. I have long said that Perth have the best colour palette in the league with the orange and purple. This is kind of making use of the whole of that palette. Better or worse brand than the one that they offered up last week?
Better. I like it. I like the added orange. I totally agree with that. I like the subtle pattern as well. I think that's really, really good. Just makes it more than just a plain old purple shirt. And, you know, I wasn't a fan of the random sash with the, what was it? The year Perth were founded.
1996, yeah.
Yeah, that looked pretty crap to me, but yeah, I prefer that. That looks very good.
Next one, Adelaide United. It's not super different to their existing one, but it does have a checkerboard pattern, which I'm always a huge rat for. I love the use of the checkerboard, even if it's just faded two-tone of the same colour. They've also gone with 3 stripes for the state Australian colours, which do match up with the Adelaide United logo. I don't think we've ever seen that represented on an Adelaide United kit, even though it is primary on their logo. What are your thoughts on this one?
Don't mind. It's similar to Western United. It's pretty similar. Like it's as good as their current one. I would have rather if the A-League men badge, or sorry, the A-League's badge and Flinders was in yellow. Personally, I think that was the big tweak that needed to be made to the Adelaide kit. But yeah, the subtle checkerboard, nice. I think it's good. I think it's certainly on par, but it's not obviously not drastically different.
First club that gets a checkerboard kit, I'll probably buy it in the league itself. Brisbane, I'm a bit meh on this one because I think it looks exactly like their kits from last season. But what were some of your thoughts? We did rate the Brisbane home kit this season as the highest in the division.
I agree. It's solid, but it's very similar. You know, again, I don't mind the the subtle pattern. But yeah, I think it's fine.
Next one, Central Coast Mariners. Now, you weren't a big rap for the middle portion of the previous kit. I didn't mind it, but what are some of your thoughts on this interpretation with the navy on the shoulders and arms? Similar, bit of a throwback to some of their previous kits in their successful periods as well.
Yeah, I prefer this. That is essentially a Mariners version of Melbourne City's kit this year. It's the same as what we see Burnley, West Ham, clubs like that wear as well. So it's got a bit of a footballism about it. So I like it. I think it's good. I would probably prefer it to this year's Mariners, but yeah, it's just a classic look.
And lucky last one, the worst kit that we reviewed last week. I can only see this as being a massive, massive improvement. I actually quite dig the kit as well. So it's got two single stripes down the middle to represent the ochre and the black in the MacArthur logo. It's a largely white kit. It's got like a pattern barcode type shape. But again, similar to what they did with the ball last year, it's a bit opaque at the base of the kit. What are some of your thoughts on this one compared with the actual offering this year?
I much prefer this one. It's hard to do much worse than the current MacArthur home kit. Just looks nicer. Similar to Western United, I think this kit's better because it sort of sticks with that original design that they had. Western United, okay, green and black stripes are not that exciting, but they've worn it as their home kit all 3 years. MacArthur have gone from no stripes to stripes. I think this one would have been a better tie-in for that look that they were going for. So, yeah, I prefer this.
So those are our two nominees. The sauce bottles at Central Coast Stadium, which again, like I have a feeling you're just going to nominate different Central Coast things every week because I've seen this happen before in history. And then at the same time, Matt Haynes Sport. Go and check out at Matt Haynes Sport over on Twitter. Haynes is spelled Haines to check out more of his stuff. This will be a Twitter poll, so it's up to you guys to decide this week who goes into Hall of Fame. We are potentially also going to open up a Patreon nomination in future weeks as well. We've sent Sog a message, but if you become a Patreon, you may potentially also get to nominate your own different Hall of Fame inductee each week, unless we get hundreds of Patreons and then it's impossible, and then we might put it to a vote for you guys to have your own nominee each week. But that's something that we're looking forward to doing in future weeks. But with Branson, to worthy additions, we carry on and we head into our next segment, which is a season preview for Sydney FC. Finishing in second place, we continue our journey down the ladder this season. Jumping in for the Sky Blues themselves, Bran. Obviously, the team that I think have arguably had the most success over the last 5 to 6 year period in the league itself. They will have gotten second place in the league last season, ACL qualification, and a runners-up trophy in the grand final itself, and still look at that as being a relatively disappointing season in some aspects. Season highlight I've put for them is their longevity at the top. They have remained competitive for each of the last 5 or 6 seasons in the league, which we haven't really seen that sort of sustained period of success in quite a while. And some of that is to do with the way they've managed to keep their current crop of players together, and then also at the same time the way that they've transitioned from the Graham Arnold era to the Steve Corica era. What are some of your thoughts on Sydney FC's season last year, and what would you say is the big highlight for them?
I thought this season was better than expected, to be honest. I thought they were going to regress a little bit more, but if you go and you have a look at the table, they only finished 2 points behind Melbourne City on the table. Now, I know that's a little bit misleading. I think Melbourne City, they clinched the Premier's Plate with 3 or 4 weeks to go. So, the last 3 games, that gap would have closed a little bit, but, they were ultra competitive. I think that I thought they were going to fall off more than they did last year. That's the truth. I thought City were going to dominate, but I thought City put a lot of pressure on them throughout the course of the year. So they were more competitive, and it just sort of showed that even without some of those same players that they'd relied on previously, like Lafondra, I know he came back at the end, but they were still, in a good position before he arrived. The fact that they were able to be competitive is really, really good. If we were to, use comparisons to other sports, it'd sort of be, similar to Geelong in the AFL, where they always seem to find a way to stay good and stay relevant, or like, the New England Patriots in the NFL always seem to find a way to get competitive, to remain competitive regardless of who's in their team. So I think the fact that they were able to finish second, and again, as you said, for that to be disappointing for them, I think that says a lot about, how successful that club's been over the past, 10 or so years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the part that you touched on is that they didn't have Lafondra for the whole season. And if you remember back to the start of last year, they were struggling to score early on, where Arguably, Barbarousis didn't really kind of lead the line that effectively. It took Bobo quite a while to get fit. Trent Bahaja had little spells here and there early part of the season, but kind of, I think, showed that he wasn't necessarily capable of leading the line consistently for an A-League team, despite having early success in the ACL campaign in their preseason last year. And then youngsters like Patrick Wood, Geordie Swibble, who we'll get to in a little bit further as well, Luka Ivanovic, like they weren't really given the opportunity to impact and really lead the line for the team, which I think frustrated quite a bit of their fan base. But having said that, if they had Lafondra from the start and some of those goals that they were unable to score in 1-1 draws, nil-all draws, whatever else, that 2-point gap to City, like maybe that becomes an advantage to them. Maybe they do stay top of the table. They weren't as impacted, as you mentioned, in the run home by international call-ups. It was really Ryan Grant and Andrew Redmayne were the big two. Ryan McGowan went as well, but I think he had a bit of a knock originally when he went across. So also impacted by Socceroos call-ups, but definitely not to the extent that I think City was in losing their best striker, best midfielder, best defender. The greatest frustration. Now, we've heard from quite a few different Sydney FC fans over the past 12 months about some of their frustrations, even with all their success. They are still heavily reliant on their older brigade, guys like Alex Wilkinson, who is evergreen at 37 and continues to be, I think, one of the best defenders in the division. Luke Bratton is now 31 years of age and he dictates a lot of their play. They had Alexander Bumyahan in their midfield last season. They also have the likes of Adam Lafondra, Bobo and Milos Ninkovic up top, who are all the wrong side of 32, 33. So their window of productivity is somewhat closing. They're all on decent contracts. They've also really struggled, I think, to bring through young talent into their team through their academy structure. They've brought Joel King to the fore, but that was really enforced by Michael Zullo's poor injury record and a lack of options in that position. They had Callum Neuvenhoff, I think is the right pronunciation, as I've just butchered that one directly into the microphone. Last season kind of broke through and got a bit of game time, but again, people like Marco Tilio that were previously at the club, players that have moved overseas like Ryan Teague, Cameron Pupion, Max Burgess, who we'll talk about a little bit further, Cam Devlin, who just made the jump over to the SPL, all came through Sydney Academy and then couldn't get game time at Sydney FC and had to go elsewhere, either in the league or internationally, to try and get their next stage of development. Really replacing that older brigade over the next couple of seasons is the biggest challenge facing them. And I think their greatest frustration will be that they haven't already started that transition a little bit. But what are some of your thoughts? What do you think would have been their biggest frustration last season?
Again, not to steal your thunder, but I totally agree with that. If we look at, the two parallels, we were talking about Melbourne City before. They had players go away on Ollie Rouge duty, on national team duty for the Socceroos. They had some injuries and stuff like that. And we saw that they were able to replace them with young players from within their own system, and they were able to thrive. O'Neill, who I'm not sure if you mentioned in that, came across from Sydney. He was hurt for a lot of last season, but he was starting for Melbourne City before he got injured. Tilio Kolikovsky, even Tom Glover as well, a young goalkeeper. Sydney went a totally different track. They brought back some of those older players like Lafondra, like Bobo as well. So I think that's got to be the biggest frustration. Rather, last season we saw historic numbers for young players getting game time in the A-League, but it didn't seem like Sydney went down that same path. And so you have to wonder what kind of impact is that going to have on them in the long term, not just from like a player development point of view, but also players looking elsewhere to get an opportunity. Like if you were a young player at Sydney FC and you're like, okay, here we go, I'm about to get my shot. And then they bring in, Bobo, I don't know how old he is, but over 35, I'd guess, and Lafondra as well, bringing him back. You're going, why bother? Why am I here? Like, I'm not going to get a shot here. I had this great opportunity and you've elected to bring in guys who are older and haven't necessarily been playing. They're coming off an off season or something like that. So I think that would be the biggest source of frustration for Sydney fans, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So worth noting, Bobo's 36, turns 37 in the next few months. And then Lafondra is 34. He turns 35 in December. So they will go into the new year with a a combined strike force age of over 70, which is crazy to think about in a league that is played during summer and all that sort of thing. But I do understand the frustration that a lot of their fans have kind of come through. And the challenging part is a lot of these players that aren't able to get into their team are quite good and they'd probably sign back. So the likes of Mark Otilia, I think he'd walk into their lineup now. I think the likes of Cam Devlin would walk into their lineup now, and they haven't really put that long-term view in place to say, okay, this is a player that we're going to develop for the next 3 years. But we'll come back to that in a moment. It does transition us into players out. They've had a couple of further young players disappear. Patrick Flopman has left, yet to re-sign, but did spend a period on loan at Brisbane Roar last season, a young defender. Jordan Swibble, a striker who has left the club as well. Luka Vanovic, who's departed and headed to Brisbane Roar. He immediately got a starting debut and a starting goal in his first appearance in the FFA Cup for Brisbane the other week. Alexander Baumjohann, the German from Schalke, who's played in a Champions League semi-finals, we were told every time he took the field on commentary. He has departed as well, yet to re-sign with any other club. And Socceroo defender Ryan McGowan has made the jump over to Q8SC, apologies. One of the few players this season that's actually made the jump over to the Middle East. We've seen more players come back than make that leap across. Of those players out, who do you think is the biggest one for them to replace in the hole that they're looking to fill?
I'm going to cheat again. I'm going to say two. I think McGowan is obviously very good. I think he's similar to what you said with Tilly. I think McGowan would probably get a starting gig at any A-League side. So to lose him, that's obviously a big loss. But again, talking about, the older brigade that Sydney have, I think losing Ivanovic is a massive loss because there was a lot of, big raps on him, and they still have, other players like Patrick Wood who might step into that kind of next generation role. But Ivanovic seemed there or thereabouts. He seemed like he was on the cusp of breaking through. The fact that he's decided to leave I think that's got to be their biggest concern, their biggest fear. It's like, well, they've already seen an exodus of young players who weren't getting game time. They've just lost another one. What's to stop the next batch of young players doing exactly the same thing if they don't get game time this year? So Luke Ivanovic, I don't think he's a massive loss on the park, just because he's quite young. We haven't seen him make a great massive impact, so I don't think it's the on park stuff that's a huge loss there. I think it's more the backstory of a young up and comer who was meant to be part of the next generation at Sydney deciding to leave. I think that's going to be a big loss for him. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I'd agree. And I think if Luka Vanovic scores like 8 goals for Brisbane this season, those calls are only going to grow from within the Sydney fan base, which will be a real challenge. But then you've almost got to look at
the message it sends. Yeah,
exactly. That's what I was going to say. The downstream impact. Like if you're a talented player at a junior level and your parents are having the conversation about do they want to be part of the Sydney FC Academy and play in that NPL structure, unless you're an ardent Sydney FC fan, there isn't really a lot of desire for you to not maybe look at MacArthur and their relationship with Northbridge, or look at even Western Sydney, who's, once we get to their preview, their development and their plan has been we're going to develop an elite academy structure similar to what Melbourne City have done, and that individual club infrastructure is what's going to carry them through. And they've also, in recent years, given playing opportunities to players like Will Mering and Mark Natter and a whole bunch of others that have really, for better or worse, gotten that exposure and helped boost some of those numbers in the league itself.
Just very quickly, one other thing that I want to jump in on there is if you compare Sydney to some of these other teams in the league, not just Melbourne City, but Adelaide United have a massive reputation for promoting their own youngsters, developing their own young players, promoting them to the first team, and then they excel immediately. Western Sydney Wanderers have a bit of a reputation for that as well. And even Brisbane, giving some guys out of the NPL a shot. So if you're a young player and you're sort of picking which club you want to go to make an impact, there's quite a few other clubs, despite their success, that you would rather go to than Sydney, I think, in terms of, being able to get promoted through the organisation and being able to crack the senior team. So I think that's going to be a big thing for them in the future.
That does kind of transition into players in. I don't think they've gone along with what you've just suggested about how they're developing for the future, but the players coming in are Max Burgess, who arguably He came through the Sydney FC Academy, couldn't get an opportunity, went over to Wellington when Ufuk Talay originally took the role, played very well for Wellington. No, I apologise. It wasn't when Ufuk Talay took the role. It was when Mark Rodan made the jump over noted stalker and bully Mark Rodan himself to Wellington, and then followed him to Western United. Hasn't played for 18 months because he wanted to leave Western United, wasn't granted a mutual termination of his contract, but he comes back to Sydney FC effectively about 6 years later. James Donachie, from the Newcastle Jets, but he didn't play for Newcastle. He comes via a season spent last year in India. Connor O'Toole joins from Newcastle Jets, and Elvis Kamsoba joins from Melbourne Victory. You know Elvis, obviously, Branson, from your time with Avondale here in the NPL when he was lighting that competition up. But 4 signings that have come in that are effectively like for like with some of their departures, and in a lot of instances, a lot older a player. What are some of your thoughts on the players in, and who do you think is going to make the biggest impact?
I think there's some interesting signings. I think if you look at those names, we spoke about Melbourne City before, there isn't that same sort of star power when you look at those 4 additions in terms of, Matthew Leckie, current Socceroos captain, Picciarelli, someone who's played in, the high levels of Europe. So that's one thing that I noticed, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. When I look at that bunch, apart from maybe Elvis Kamsoba, the other 3 sort of proven A-League level plays, they're good. They're good. They're definitely going to strengthen the squad in terms of squad depth, which is something that's been big for Sydney FC in the past, where they've had players on their bench who they're able to bring in and make impact. If they have injuries, they've got A-League caliber players ready to go. So I think those are good additions. It does sort of not youth them up. What a weird phrase. I think it does bring their average age down slightly, possibly. If you look at guys who are going to be in the starting lineup, maybe. Actually, the more I think about that, maybe not. So I think they've added some good, solid A-League caliber talent. Elvis Kamsoba is an interesting one. I'm very interested to see how he goes. He had a bit of a rough time at the Victory. He also played in a terrible squad. So did he perform that well? Not really. But that being said, no one in the Victory has really performed that well in the past couple of years. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how he's used in Sydney. I will admit I was surprised he got another gig in the A-League based on his performances with the VAC. So it'll be interesting to see if, Sydney FC can get the best out of him, because we saw in Avondale he scored for fun. Obviously the A-League is a totally different beast to the NPL, but I'll be really interested to see if Sydney can get the most out of him.
Yeah, definitely. I think Max Burgess is a like-for-like replacement with Birmingham, but he's younger and he's Australian, even though he is 27 now. James Donachie is younger than Ryan McGowan. I think that's just a like-for-like replacement. We'd expect him to partner Alex Wilkinson at the back. Connor O'Toole, that one's interesting because they already had 2 very good left backs in Michael Zulo when he's fit, and arguably I think one of the best young players in the league, who had again a fantastic Ollie Roos campaign in Joel King. If O'Toole starts ahead of Joel King, then all hope is lost for youth development at Sydney FC. And Elvis Kamsoba, again, similar to you, fascinated by that, because I would have thought if he was going somewhere in the league, it would be perhaps a lower divisional team, someone like a Mariners or a Newcastle or whatever else. The fact that he's made the jump from Melbourne Victory, a team that finished, bottom of the league last season, to Sydney FC, a team that expects to be challenging for titles, that one for me is fascinating, that he's actually moved up effectively.
One sort of role, there's no way he starts. I do not think he starts for Sydney. No way. Bear with me. It's a bit of a weird comparison here, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was sort of like an Alu Kuol for the Mariners. Totally different player, but, someone who comes on in the 70th minute, someone who's, just provides energy, something different, more speed, all that sort of stuff. I have a feeling that it might be that kind of impact sub role. And if he's able to, again, I'm not saying he's going to have the success of Alu Kuol or even score as many headers or do whatever or depart for the Bundesliga at the end of the season based on his success with Sydney, but I think he might have a similar kind of off the bench, make an impact, last 15-minute kind of role.
Yeah, they already have that in Trent Bahaja. So unless their plan is to
Oh,
just
true.
take
True.
guys in the last 10 minutes who've got 96 pace on FIFA and just throw them on the pitch and see what happens, like that could be it. Because let's face it, you're not going to get a lot of like running out of Lafondra and Bobo. So maybe they just need to get the right pieces around them, like Barbarousis, like Bahaja, like Kamsoba, that are going to do and be that pacey option to try and get him behind. Coaches and captains, Steve Corica, again, continues in the helm. One of the huge credits we've got to give Sydney FC is how well they managed the transition from Graham Arnold to Steve Corica, and similar to what we praised City for the Patrick Isnorbo transition. Corica was a youth coach and then a long-term assistant and then moved into the head role. He does play the same shape, formation and players every single week, for better or worse. But the other one, their captain, Alex Wilkinson, one of my favourite players in the history of the league. I think he's in the conversation of the top 2 or 3 players in this competition's history. Just continues to be an elite level central defender despite being nearly 40, which is ridiculous to think about. And I think he is also one of 2 players in the league that are still going from the first season of the A-League itself, Liam Reddy being the other one. Areas for improvement. What do you think Sydney FC are really going to set themselves for this season that they want to do better than they did last year?
That's a good one. I think that incorporate, I don't know, incorporate youth, but we've sort of banged on a little bit about that one. I'd like to see something that sort of suggests that there's going to be a little bit more of a changing of the guard. You know, we thought we were going to see that last year when guys like, you know, Lafondra left, you're like, all right, this is going to be a new look Sydney, but now they've brought him back. So I'd like to see maybe something that suggests that they're going to have a little bit more of a strategic passing on. Again, not sure if I'm articulating that so well, but a bit more of a transition to what Sydney FC are going to look like in the future, because we've mentioned their age. They've got a bunch of older players who are not going to be there forever. So it'll be interesting to see. It's almost like they're having a second go at that transition. So I think they can certainly execute it a little bit better, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I think the other one, we haven't even spoke about him, Milos Ninkovic, arguably the best player in the division. Still 36. We haven't spoken about him at all. So, like, they've still got...
Joint Johnny Warren medalist? Did he win it
last season? I don't know how he did it because there was a big chunk of games he didn't start, but there's flaws in the Johnny Warren medal voting, but we'll talk about that another time. Go for it.
I was just going to say, we saw how different Sydney FC looked in the grand final without him. Without him on the park, they were totally different.
Who knows if he had been fit and if Luke Bratton hadn't got himself sent off, how that might have played out. But I already kind of moaned a little bit about Aaron Moy not winning the Johnny Warren, so maybe I'll save the rest of that complaint for another episode or something like that. I think their big area for improvement, and the way they're looking at it, they clearly don't care about this youth development part that everyone else has been kind of praising about the league. Otherwise, their recruitment strategy would have been very different. Players like Harry van der Sar, players like Patrick Wood, players like Callum Nieuwenhof, who I said it correctly that time, they would potentially be looking as being the replacements for some of the departures that they've already had. So I think the way that they've recruited, bringing in players that have A-League experience, they are still definitely pushing towards being one of the oldest starting 11s in the division. And that means that they need immediate success. I think they'll look back on last season and think kind of what we alluded to earlier, that if they had had goals in the team from the start, they'd have won the league again, and then everything would be saying it effectively not matter anymore. They are famously the team that Graham Arnold said is not the A-League isn't a development league while managing at Sydney FC. I think they are still taking that opportunity, that they are a big enough club they can scoop up talented youngsters from other clubs and bring them into an A-League environment as proven winners. So yeah, I think that'll be their area for improvement. They'll try and score and set the tone early and really try and lead the division from the start all the way through. We'll see if it plays out that way. Membership pitch though, Brian, if you were going to try and sell Sydney FC fans that haven't got a membership already, if they wanted to get involved in the best leagues in the world, what would your membership pitch be?
My slogan would be, the band is back together. That would be my slogan. You go, look, you know, Lafondra's back, Bobo's back, Ninkovic is still here, obviously, Braddon's still here, Wilco's still here, Redmayne's still here. You know, the band from the championship winning era is all here again. You know, you saw you saw how much success Sydney FC had with that group. That would be my membership pitch. You know, the band's back together. If you're not going to embrace the youth, at least, you know, get around the fact that you've got an older squad and sell it that way. So that would be my membership pitch if we're going for a groovy slogan. Or is that what you're going for?
It is. I think
that'll work. That'll
Yeah,
work.
I'm just trying to find out if Adrian Mijevski or Jordy Boyce or any of the other players from that team are actually currently free agents that we may
Yep.
potentially get see signed. They're all 37 as well, so they fit the policy at the moment. Look, I'd go with the same. They are very good. Like for the criticism that we've given them and trying to echo some of the sentiments of their fan base, they are very, very well run as a football club.
Yep.
David Tratkovenko has put a ton of money, of his own money, into it to make sure that it is a stable environment. They have strong representation in youth Australian teams all throughout those different age groups. They have got good players coming through. It's just whether those good players get an opportunity in the first team.
Yeah.
So
And just on that quickly, sorry, like these are high level criticisms for Sydney FC. Sorry, something fell off the desk. This is great. These are high level criticisms, of course, because they've had so much sustained success. No other A-League club has been able to replicate it in the same way. So clearly whatever they've done has worked, and you can't blame them for trying to do the same thing when they know that it's worked. So it's high level criticisms, it's worked before. So why not?
But if they go out and win the league, they're getting close to like a decade of dominance where they've been in the top two teams in the position, which is, it's ridiculous. It absolutely is. So they deserve a ton of credit for that. Their expectations we've kind of highlighted. They'll expect a challenge for the title again, and I think they'll want to improve on their second place finish last year. Where's your prediction? So we haven't got the power rankings on screen, but would you put them above or below Melbourne City in terms of season expectations and how you think their off-season's gone so far?
I would put them below Melbourne City. We'll get more into our power rankings next week as well, when we have a few more clubs that we're able to talk about, and we can sort of tier them out a little bit here. But I would have them just below Melbourne City. Melbourne City are the strongest side on paper. We saw in their last game, Melbourne City beat Sydney FC, and there were players missing from both sides due to international duty. But I think City were missing more than Sydney were. So if that makes sense. So Sydney were, I don't know.
I get what you mean. Melbourne City lost their best striker in Jamie McLaren, their best midfielder in Connor Metcalf, their best defender in Curtis Good, whereas Sydney FC lost...
and they still beat Sydney, if that makes sense.
And Sydney FC lost largely their defensive core, where they had players able to step in, like Ryan Grant, phenomenal player, but was covered by Paulo Retre. Andrew Redmayne, for better or worse, got called up to the Socceroos, whether he deserved it or not. Ryan McGowan, and they had players there available to step into that central defensive position as well.
Thanks for bailing me out there. I got my train of thought muddled up. I was too amazed by the surroundings of French Island here. I got distracted by its beauty, lost my train of thought, couldn't execute, but thanks for stepping in there, mate. Yeah, but you got the point across that I was trying to say. I think so. Back to your original question, Sydney, their goals has to be top two. That's the expectations that they have. They've had such longevity, such sustained success. I think anything else would be, a step back for them. So I think, there's no reason why they shouldn't finish top two. I thought they were going to regress last year. They didn't. They finished second anyway. So I think that's got to be the same goal.
Maybe that should have been our membership pitch. Like, they'll win out of spite for anything that we say about them. So they'll absolutely continue their tradition of success.
The one thing that's always sort of plagued Sydney FC, though, has been their lack of success in the Asian Champions League. I think it'll, in particularly when you compare them to Western Sydney Wanderers, who, of course, won the competition. So I think it'll be interesting if they go, look, do you know what? We're going to prioritise the ACL this year, which is something that we haven't really seen teams do recently, where they go, look, do you know what? Another A-League trophy, another premiership play, that doesn't mean so much. We want to prioritise the ACL. So it'll be interesting to see if they go down that path. I don't think they will, but I wouldn't blame them for doing it.
If we can even get there, like, who knows what's going to be, if it's a hub or if it's in the middle of our final series again, which just kills us in that competition. I personally think if we're going to get into that ACL Cup, not the ACL Cup, the Asian Cup, that secondary tier cup competition. I cannot remember what it's called now, but if we get more positions and spots in that, I think that'll be very interesting to see how the league grows and develops and starts to prioritise more representation within Asia. But credit Sydney FC, fantastic club for all that we've kind of said. They have recruited strongly, they've recruited early. There really, I think, are only two clubs that we can do like a comprehensive season preview for 45 days out or whatever it is from the league starting, and that is because Sydney have recruited early early. They've got their squad together, and now they're just working through basically getting to round one, where they play Sydney Derby against Western Sydney Wanderers away at Bank West Stadium, now Combank Stadium. For those of you who haven't kept up with the news, it is Saturday the 20th of November. It's part of an A-League doubleheader of games kicking off at that time as part of the new broadcast agreement at 7:45. Get yourself vaccinated, get down to the game, support your clubs, whether it's Western Sydney or Sydney FC, because it will be absolutely rocking. I hate round one derbies, but I think given the gap that we've had and how limited our access to football has been over the last few months, everybody will be there. It will be the hot ticket in town for that particular weekend, and it should be an absolutely fantastic atmosphere. But Branson, that brings us to an end of another podcast. Our time together has absolutely flown by, as it so often does. Who knows what headlines we're going to have to talk about next week? Who knows what different stories are going to come out in football media between now and next week's episode as well? Have you got anything that you want to give a plug to? Any news or anything I've forgotten throughout the course of this week?
Well, one thing that we haven't mentioned, at the time of recording, the Socceroos have not played Oman. The reason we haven't mentioned that is by the time this podcast is released, that game will have already taken place. But I'm really looking forward to that. I get around World Cup qualifiers. I always get a little bit nervous. I think the Oman game is going to be very, very interesting. Oman beat Japan 1-0, so not going to be an easy game. Of course, it's being played in Doha in Qatar again. The Socceroos unable to play in Australia, so looking forward to that. And then we play Japan next week as well. Is that correct?
It is correct. Right? Away from home, yeah. Big fixture for them, given that they did drop the points you mentioned against Oman. But I've set the alarm for 4:50 brand to get up for the 5 a.m. kickoff. That doesn't necessarily 100% guarantee that I'll watch the game. We'll see how we go.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm looking forward to that. You know, the game will have already taken place by the time this podcast's released, but I'm looking forward to the Oman clash and the big clash against Japan as well, mate.
Fantastic stuff. The world of football doesn't stop. As far as this podcast is concerned, if you're not already watching it on YouTube, you can also check it out on Spotify. We are now finally up on that platform as well, thanks to the two people, which probably both of our parents that have downloaded those ones in the last couple of weeks. Go and check us out at Twitter at The Other FIFA and over on Patreon at The Other FIFA as well. If you want to join as a $1 Patreon supporter, just give us $1. It's $1. What else are you going to do with it this month? But more than anything, as always, from Branson and myself, thank you so much for listening along. We appreciate it. And we'll see you all again on the island.